Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, and Ben Kingsley, Chair of Property Investment Professionals of Australia, and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisor of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I give you the insider's guide to property investing. Hello, mate.
G'day, bud. How are you?
Very good. Hey, we should do a little sound check here, Ben, because
Test 1, 2.
Last couple of weeks we had a little technical issue, and a couple of our listeners brought it to our attention.
Yes.
We kind of hope that no one realised that we weren't recording out of the toilet. Sounded a little echoey.
Well, sometimes trains and trams and all that are loud, and so the sound quality needs to be good. If they only knew how we started originally on a little Samsung.
No, don't say that. I don't want anyone to know that we started on a Samsung. Let's tell them it was an Apple.
Very good.
Tell them it was an iPhone. But so well done to those listeners who picked up that it sounded like our sound booth was very, very echoey. It's because we had a technical hitch. So hopefully, testing 1, 2, this one is actually working okay. Mate, how's your week been?
Yeah, good. I've had lots on. We're going to talk about one of the things I did this week. Sky Business News, Monday night, so Your Money, Your Call with Margaret Lomas, and that was fun. And then Tuesday I had an important meeting in regards to negative gearing, but we'll get to that later in the podcast. Today I want to talk about Rentvesting.
Well, I want to know if in those meetings it's only important if you're all holding clipboards. So we all holding clipboards, because that really ramps up the importance.
All these associations, we had all the big wigs there, and yeah, we're all holding clipboards, mate, just to keep that imagery alive.
It's a well-known thing in television. Anyone who's holding a clipboard is important. So if you were holding a clipboard, you were definitely important. Oh, good. So Rentvesting, we had a...
Notice how we're not talking footy?
No, well...
Shoot.
Well, here's the deal. I'm going to a rugby match
tomorrow night. That's it. You've moved on.
Our Sydney listeners will be mentally high-fiving, and the Melbourne listeners and the Adelaide listeners and the Perth. What have you done? But,
no
box seats.
Oh, that's all right. I'll go to that.
Melbourne Rebels versus New Zealand.
Mate, if they're opening a paper bag, I'd go to that if I was in a box.
So I'll let the listeners know if I'm going to convert to rugby, but it's just British Bulldogs with a ball, isn't it?
Well,
I've just offended a whole range of people now, haven't I?
Whilst we're offending them, can I sort of have a go at that?
Yeah.
Typical Melburnians, aren't we? We absolutely...
Hey, I'm a Perth boy. Come on.
Well, it's true. AFL boy. So here's my deal, right? I reckon it was 3 really drunk blokes at a bar, right? And they were so drunk, and they were trying to invent a new game, right? So what they said, let's get blokes who just run straight into each other, and there's all lots of laughter and all that going on. And then when the ball gets caught, let's get them to scrum in and sniff each other's backsides. And they're all screaming at right? And the final one, so let's make them run forward, but wait for it, throw the ball backwards to go forwards. Oh, brilliant. And they're all laughing, and the next thing you know, we've got a very popular game in Australia. And it's called NRL and Rugby Union Rugby. There you go. Now I've completely offended everybody.
Mate, I think the reviews on iTunes will now be single star.
Sorry, it'll get obviously all in jest. I'm sure you can say the same thing about aerial ping pong and tight shorts and all the above. So we want to hear that.
You're only serious though, weren't you?
No, it wasn't serious.
Hey,
lived in Sydney for 10 years. I love my Rabbitohs.
So I'm going to Amy Stadium. Never been there before. I'm looking forward to it. But Rentvesting.
Yes. So we talked about this a couple of weeks ago about the article that we put together for Money Magazine, and now it's a new month, so we can talk more about it. And for those who are listening, if you want to actually read that article, it's going to be downloadable from the website, propertycatch.com.au. But what is it, and how does this sort of conversation come about? So, when you're talking to clients, it's really important to understand, and this is for all the listeners when they're sort of planning out their future strategy, not only in just investing in property, but generally. The big things we want to focus in on is basically the alignment between our personal goals and our financial goals. And yet, let's face it, we all have dreams, we all have hopes and goals in terms of what we're trying to set up. And really that's what we create wealth for, all right? And part of that, and I refer to this as big rocks in the jar. The biggest rock in the jar for most people is to own that owner-occupied home in a suburb and area that they feel as if there's been some success and some reward for all of their effort in working a third of their life. Okay, so when I'm sitting down and talking to clients, and when our team's sitting down talking to clients, they're the most important things that we want to flesh out, those goals and aspirations. And once we understand that they do want this big rock in the jar, we basically put that in as the main thing we need to focus around. Now think of it like this. I mean, it's not that easy these days to just go off and walk up and buy that dream home. Property's expensive in our bigger cities, and so there are going to be challenges in terms of being able to achieve that. Because what you've got to understand is when you're trying to achieve that, you've got the value of the property growing usually every year, so you're really going to be taking on more and more debt. So as I say to first home buyers quite a lot is, if the value of the property is moving slower than you can save, you keep saving, especially if you're buying out wide. But if the value of property is moving, you try and get in as quick as possible. But as we know from our buyer's decision quadrant, it's not that easy to get that dream home. So with all of that flushed out, we then look at people's cash flows. And when we actually look at those cash flows, this is the sad reality for some people in the sense that aspiring to get that, $1.5, $2 million dream home is going to, eliminate their ability potentially to invest in other things. So, if you're servicing $1 million mortgage at 6%, it's $60,000 a year just in the interest bill. So it's really important to understand that. And as a matter of fact, and I know I'm talking too much, but I'll just keep going because I love a good conversation.
No, keep going.
But last night we were sitting with an individual female in her mid-30s, and she's basically trying to work out what's important to her. And we had the conversation, and the original plan was to buy an investment property now, and then she's already got one investment property and she rents at the moment, and then try and get her an owner-occupied home. And as we tried to play that out with all the cash flows and our conservative assumptions, 7.25% long-term interest rates, 1.5% holding costs ongoing, 92% occupancy rate, so write those down. If you're doing your own models, they're good numbers to work with.
No depreciation.
No depreciation. We couldn't make it work, on her income and the level of lifestyle and living that she wanted to continue to keep enjoying. So the reality is that even though we aspire to get the best outcome, we've got to work within the parameters of what we've got. And we don't want the models to suggest that it's easy when it's not. So we had a conversation, and the conversation was a question around this. And I think it's a really important question that every household should consider. What's more important to you? Owning your owner-occupied home or financial independence? And when you put that question out there, it does to have a conversation around, well, you know what? And for Selena, she was very happy with the idea of renting. She's been comfortable with renting. And so she said, if it came down to that, I would want to look at the options. And so we then went about building a strategy and explaining all the cash flows to her around why it's more successful in terms of being a rentvestor as opposed to actually owning your own home.
Mate, I like it. The real life examples. I think it's always the question of, do you want to touch your own four walls, or do you want to touch multiple of your own four walls that you don't want to live in? And I always think it's a question of, do you want 3 people to pay for the property, or do you want 1? Because owner-occupier, you're covering the whole bills yourself. Whereas the investment property, it's the tenant, the taxman, and you paying off the property. But I think we always say that, with a few exceptions, that investment grade price bandwidth is typically 300 to 850. There are exceptions either side.
Always.
But typically that's where the bell curve exists. Now, the thing is, as soon as you go outside of that investment grade bandwidth on the upside, that's when rent vesting starts to really stack up. So if you think, maybe if you're living in a $1.5 million house renting, think about if you're paying 4.5% in interest before you're paying rates and maintenance, versus the poor old investor at that value is probably only getting 2.5% yield, if they're lucky.
If they're lucky at that price point.
So just pure cash flow, it makes sense. But I think it plays into the conditioning from generations prior of rent money is dead money. And I actually think that's true if you don't have an alternative bigger strategy, which is exactly what your article's about. Yeah,
look, we're basically saying is if there is a differential of 2%, then in terms of the modelling and the actual financial impact, that builds up significantly over time. In one of the examples, it's $1.1 million difference over a 20-year period. So again, check out the article. I'm not going to sit here and go through each of the case studies in the article. That's for you guys to go and do some research on. But I want to just bring up the pros and cons in terms of how this conversation comes about. So in our bigger cities, and I had a chat with Chris on 2GB about this when the article came out, and he made a really good observation, because he came across the article and said, Ben, I want to get you on the radio program, and we can also put that interview up as well. And what he basically said was, I've got friends who live in New York, and it's exactly the same for them, in the sense that they can't afford to buy in downtown Manhattan, but they're realistic about that. So they rent there, but they still need to plan for the future. So they're obviously investing. And I could say for all of our expat listeners, I mean, the Australian market is a fabulous property market to invest in. Okay, and we've got a lot of clients that we work with who are expats, and we've got a lot of interstate clients that we work with. The same principles apply, and we've talked about borderless investing before. When we come into the marketplace, and these expats, they're going and earning good money, but they're not going to go and buy somewhere where they necessarily will have a stretched relationship when they're living back here and their properties are on the other side of the planet. So they want to invest their money back here. And when I say New York, London, Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo, when I say those mega cities, people just assume, they're expensive. Yeah. Now, what we've got to understand is Sydney and Melbourne are becoming large international cities. I think we've used the stat before. I think there's only 12 cities in America that are bigger than Melbourne and Sydney. And Melbourne and Sydney are right in the top 100 cities in the world in terms of population size, and they're set to grow. So the reality is when you then sort of start thinking, I want to chase down that $1.5, $2 million house in the right area, I could actually rent that for half or even less at the moment to actually live in that area. And then I get all the ancillary benefits of being in the area. So it's this classic case of live where I want to live. And as long as I'm making sure that I'm investing, not spending the savings, I'm going to be financially better off.
I think it gives hope for families in particular who are thinking, well, we're in a house that doesn't quite suit our needs, so we need to upgrade, plus we want to get ahead. And often it's the choice between one or the other, because if they're going to upgrade the house, bigger mortgage, more cash flow, less surplus, all that sort of stuff. So if a family was to just look at the raw numbers, they could get their lifestyle straight away right now, get a bigger house for the family whilst renting, and at the same time go and buy a 1 or a 2 bedroom apartment in downtown Manhattan type of equivalent. Which will serve their bank balance, will serve their balance sheet really well, whilst they're also catering for their lifestyle right now. And that could be just a beautiful little segue for them. But it does really, financially, it absolutely stacks up, but what it doesn't take into account is emotion.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, at the end of the day, and this is the conversation we were having with our clients, not just Selena, but many others who are choosing to take that Rentvest story. It's like, so you're at the dinner party and the conversation comes up about, great house, what's the story? And you say, well, actually I rent it, and you can front foot it, and they say, well, and the surprise of, really? Yeah, but I've got 2 or 3 investment properties. The moment you say you've got 2, 3, 4 investment properties, whatever, it's like,
shut down.
Wait a minute, what are you doing? Well, I'm being smart with my money, and I'm basically saying that this house or this apartment or this penthouse or whatever it may be, the landlord fixes up all the ancillaries. They cover off on all the body corporate fees and all that. I just pay the rent. Something breaks down, I've got it covered. In terms of this, I don't have to pay for the servicing of the lifts. I don't have to do any of that, and I'm just enjoying what I'm getting now. But what I'm doing with my properties is I'm focusing on properties that have less holding costs, and I'm investing out in a strategy of properties which might be, higher yielding, which helps me with my cash flow. Straight away, there's this you trendsetter, and that's sort of part of what I was trying to allude to in the article, where it was, there is a growing momentum towards this, because that is the financial reality of us growing up as a nation and us having these mega cities. And, we're not going to see more and more 3 and 4 and 5 bedroom lovely houses being built within our inner city fringes, because there's no land. It's all utilised. What we're going to see is some of those being knocked down and duplexes and townhouses being built. So you can potentially rent one of those and go off and invest.
Yeah, and I guess you could get the brother and sister. The ideal scenario is brother wants to live in suburb A, sister wants to live in suburb B. Why don't you buy each other's house that you want to live in, and the other person becomes the tenant of the other person? Because then you don't have the issue of if they're under that arrangement, your landlord kicking you out. Because that's one of the fears that people have. What if the landlord tells me I've got to move on?
Yeah, that's right. And when we do the models, you've got to understand that inside the modelling, there's a lot going on. There's no doubt that there is a period of time with these models where there's a little bit of negative gearing. So that's the taxman helping out, like you said before, in terms of, so you've got the tenant and the taxman helping you being able to buy that property. So when you buy a large home, you're a slave to your mortgage. And so the other component of that is that you may not be in a position to then invest for 5, 7, 10 years. By that stage, you might be in your late 40s, and there's not enough time. I talk about property being like a beautiful heavy cab sav. It's not very good drinking early on, but after 10, 15, 20 years, it's beautiful drinking. Well, that's really what a property investor needs to look at, is that long-term investing.
And I guess for the gypsies who are listening to us, it suits their ability to just go with the flow. They might want to be here for 2 years, there for 2 years, move around. They might be in a role where, they could be headhunted by, I don't know, a multinational who's got an office in Sydney, has got an office in Singapore. So someone who has a propensity or a horizon that says they might move, it's perfect for them. They don't have to pay stamp duty. They don't have to have all those costs of planting their roots in a particular place. But they can still, if they've got a good income, they can still park that into their portfolio while still looking after the family. Typical fly in, fly out.
Correct, because what the immediate reservation is but the landlord could kick me out. So the flip side of that is go with the flow, is like, we've got clients who are like, yeah, we're going to try and live here for a few years and check that out. And we've never tried to live in a townhouse or an apartment before. So we're going to check that out if we've got no kids. If we've got kids, obviously our limitations are a little bit stronger, but we're going to live on one side of the city and then we're going to check out the other side of the city, or we're going to see where the great school zones are, and we're potentially going to get into a great public school. So they're the types of conversations that had, but automatically we sort of say, but they could kick you out. And let's face it, we all hate moving house. Packing up the boxes, the inconvenience, the setting up all the utilities, especially the bloody internet. We all know how hard it is to get the phone line connected. But, that is getting better and better. But that's the conversation. So, yeah, there are some negatives around it. Okay, well, I'm just settling in, the family's really enjoying the street, we've built up a great... And then the landlord says, I'm really sorry, I'm selling the property or I'm developing the property. In some cases, there may even be a conversation around... would you like to buy it off me? Now, that being said, if you've built a plan, it's unlikely that we're going to be in a position to do so. But there can be cases where someone started on that rentvesting journey, and because this is so important to them, because they have met, lifelong friends and they want to stay in that area, they will liquidate their investment property portfolio and buy that home and then reset. Okay, and they understand there's costs in that. And that's probably one of the other big messages out there around doing this. If you're going to be a rent investor, it's got to be very clear that if you're going to execute on a couple of properties early, then there's no real going back without resetting or losing some money. So, when I got a young couple in and they're saying, no, we really want to rent invest, and we say, you're absolutely sure, because if you turn around in 3 or 4 years' time when we've executed on 2 properties, and then you say, actually, our world's changed. And that can happen. But just be mindful that you're going to then probably take at least one large step backwards before you can move forward. So we really do try and say, when you're thinking about this, stress test it. Stress test it, stress test it, stress test it. And then they come in and no, we're all for this. This is exciting. We do want a financial future that's really positive for ourselves, to build a legacy for our children. So, they engage and start to do the rent investing.
Some great wisdom there, Ben. I can see now why you're asked to write the article, Fear, False Evidence Appearing Real. Read that one?
Yeah.
Or Forget Everything and Run. There's actually another one for F.
Oh, nice. I like that.
But the fear is often unfounded, because if you're worried about the landlord kicking you out, very simple question. Property manager, is this person an owner-occupier who's only moving out for 5 minutes and wants to come back in 2 years' time? Or is this a professional investor? If it's a professional investor and you want to stay there for 10 years, they're going to be happy as long as you treat it well and pay market rent. So
yeah, great point. And if it's really going well for you, you could probably say, can we sign a 3-year lease?
Yeah.
And I'll do 4% or 5% increases. Really great point, mate. Good tip.
So don't box at shadows. So we understand that rent investing isn't for everyone. We're in a country that's conditioned at the great Australian dream. Your home is your castle. It's a measure of status. It's a measure of wealth. It's a measure of how good am I doing. So we get that.
Because don't forget the capital gains. That's probably one of the other big ones that we need to point out. And that is, with your principal place of residence, you've got a capital gains exemption. Okay, so everyone goes, well, that's all great. You know, if I ever want to sell my home, I get all the profits that come out of the property. True, but you're not getting anything that's producing an income. So if your strategy then is in 20 years' time, you sell your $2 million house and downgrade to a $1 million house, and then you've got $1 million that's helped you, that's an absolute legitimate strategy. But what we do find, and you only know it yourself, is a lot of those houses are held on to for 30, 40, 50 years. When the good houses in the street come, first time offered in 60 years, first time offered in 80 years, that's an indication of people who basically are saying that once they're in, they really like it. And the kids, the family that's grown up there with the parents, they don't really are necessarily downsizing either, because the parents love to drop their kids off and the grandparents like to look after those kids. And so the house is still being utilised more often than not. The other interesting point about that is, from a pension point of view, your principal place of residence is not means tested at the moment. Okay, so you got this. So you let's say you do realise that $1 million. Well, that $1 million is now means tested and is going to affect pensions and so forth. So that's the reason also why a lot of people are staying in their family homes as opposed to selling them down. So there's a lot to consider. Check out the article. We sort of break it down. We give some case studies and some numbers to sort of show what that looks like. But it really is something that is going to have some further momentum, and there are people who are definitely trending in this way.
No, very good point, Ben. You can't take your front door down to Woolies and get your groceries, so you still have to have something over and above the family home to do that. And I was just going to quickly summarise the pros that you talk about in the article. There's the pros are lifestyle, wealth building, cost savings, all care, no responsibility, ease the burden, tax benefits, and go with the flow. So if you want to check out those categories, go to the website, propertycatch.com.au, we'll have the article up. And the cons, as Ben just said, the loss of the full CGT exemption, there's an emotional cost, there's a loss of control, there's some peer pressure, and then there's the theory of rent money is dead money. So he's unpacked that really well. So go and check that out. Ivers will have that up this afternoon. She's giving us a strained look, but I'm sure it'll be up there for you, which is good. And the other thing we wanted to talk about is you mentioned you had a think tank this week in Sydney.
Yeah. I don't want to sort of get too much into it, but effectively, obviously, you know my views on negative gearing and the proposed changes to that. What episode was that we did, Ivers? We'll bring that up where I had my rant on negative gearing, and we had that. So that's in there. So the message around that was that it's very clear. We just did some analysis on all of the people involved in the property investment industry and started looking for their commentary around negative gearing. And there was not one association that was in favour of it. Now, people might say, of course,
self-interest.
Yeah. Now, and this is a loose example, right? And this is something that I'll probably get shot down for, but when it comes to...
Mate, you've already done that with the rugby talk at the beginning, mate. I think you've distracted.
Sorry about all of that. My sort of northern hemisphere listeners, they're all very important, our Queenslanders and our New South Wales people. Anyway, the point I'm making is with global warming, 95% of scientists are pretty sure it's there. Now, the scientists want to prove a fact, and they want to prove a point. Now, some people could say, that's all self-interest. They get paid to look at it and study it and all that. And I'm like, well, I disagree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, they're looking for what's going to benefit the globe, and they're, as scientists, they need to prove a theory. Well, when it comes to self-interest, you might argue that we have self-interest, but we are the people on the ground. We are pretty sure in terms of what it's going to look like in terms of the scenarios. And all the scenarios point to either a softening of property construction and the property market, an oversupply for certain areas of the marketplace in regards to high-rise and medium density and house and land packages, because effectively that's the new stock. And one of the interesting ones we talked about, and this wasn't necessary, I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of all the associations, but if you want to fix affordability, effectively you've got around 9.6, 9.7 million dwellings, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to fix affordability for new entrants into the market, what does that do for all the existing entrants, the existing owners?
Robs them of their wealth.
Correct. So are we saying that we want affordability at the expense of those $9.6 million, 9.6 million properties? We want their values to go down so it's easier for 150,000 people to buy new properties next year? I don't think we want that. I don't think that's beneficial for the economy. I don't think that's beneficial for jobs, both direct and indirect. So the only way you fix affordability is you put high-speed access to employment centres out to regional towns where the land is cheaper, okay, and the opportunities to buy are more respectful. If you don't do that, you can't fix this. I mean, how does Singapore, Hong Kong, all these big cities fix affordability? They can't. And you only need to have a look at some of the documentaries on, New York City. These people travel out by train out to the outer suburbs or, far away from the metropolis that is New York City, because that's where the price point is. You're just not going to get that price point in a city because the wealthier people want convenience, they want lifestyle, they want status, that human interest and human behaviour stuff that we talk about. So when you put it into that context, I don't know whether the Labor Party has thought that through. I think they're sort of saying, if this is going to be a solution for affordability, when the reality is the marketplace, and I've said this before, don't necessarily want to live in a hotel room, in a high-rise apartment. There's a growing number who are starting to look at that concept, and they don't necessarily want to live on the fringes of the city. So you aren't going to fix that big affordability conversation. So it's important to understand that. So the nutshell of the meeting was that we got a consensus that any changes to negative gearing is like playing with fire, is probably that synopsis. And there's a lot of data that we want to see to get the models right. And so, from that point of view, a lot of the larger associations were saying exactly that. We're not going to jump on a bandwagon and put our hat on negative gearing and say these are the scenarios, because we simply don't know. But what we do think is when you try to play with a marketplace that has 2 million property investors, and the consequences could be that you're also affecting mum and dad homeowners, then you want to get it. You want to get those models right, and we think that the modelling that's been used by the Labor Party is insufficient to justify their logic around implementing such a model and such a policy request.
What do you think's going through Bill Shorten's head right now? He's a couple of months on since he made that announcement. Do you think that he would still be as, and I know you're speculating here, but do you think he'd still feel as strongly as he did when he announced it? Or do you think that he'd, who do you think he would be in his camp to give him strength that he should continue moving forward with this? Do you think anyone exists?
Look, my views are my own, okay, and so I'm making it clear that I'm not speaking on behalf of Pippa. I'm not even necessarily speaking on behalf of Empower Wealth here. Okay, this is politics, and the game of politics is to be in power. All right, when you're going to an election, you want to have large incentives. Okay, now the models that they've built is giving a windfall under their hypothetical models of $35 billion. The other, that's negative gearing changes, right? The other changes they're looking at was an excise tax on smoking, so cigarettes. That was going to raise them about 85 million, and they've got some others, 85 billion, I should say. So they're trying to pledge $100 billion worth of election promises, and they need to cost that. So their solution is what they think is low-hanging fruit. Let's pick on all the people who've made money in property. Let's paint them as the aggressors against housing affordability, and that's how they're going to go to the market. So you will not see the Labor Party change their position on this. They're going to fight and fight and fight to death, because if they lose that $35 billion in so-called savings and revenue generation, they can't fulfil their promises in the elections on the other side, their spending promises. So this is politics, mate, at a big scale. So my view is they'll hang tough. So we've got to from a education point of view, we've got to educate the media, we've got to educate the politicians and the policymakers, and we've got to educate consumers, because you don't want a situation where you've got mum and dad having an argument with their daughter or son, because the daughter or son saying this is wrong, there's no affordability here, and the mother and father's consequences could be that if a policy like this, which is ill-conceived, gets into the market and the family's wealth is impacted by that decision, it's not sensible. So that's the sort of message that comes across. So it's a big game, politics.
Yeah, and it'd be a big challenge for the long-term Labor voters who would be feeling conflicted, wouldn't they? If they, they want to stay true to their political beliefs, but if it's going to undermine the value of their home, they'd be
correct. You're absolutely right. I mean, if the scenarios play out like we think they would, imagine that mum and dad owner who spent 5 years saving up their deposit for their home in the suburbs, their great Australian dream, and they've paid $400,000 for this property. They've saved up $50,000. And with this comes a flood of new stock, and that new stock, they're thinking, well, this is great. There's real activity in the marketplace. It's all going, and then all of a sudden, all these for lease signs get put everywhere. And then they stay up, and then there's no tenants, and they're going, wait, and the investors start going, wait a minute. This is worse than I thought. I needed some of that rent to help me pay for this. So I'm in dire straits here. I'm gonna have to fire sale this property, and then that flows through.
Put a for sale sign at the front, and no investor can buy it.
Correct, and then then it's a secondary market, and all of a sudden it's not worth half as good. So what about again that young couple who strive to save that deposit, and all of a sudden their house is now worth $350,000. They're not going to be so pleased in regards to policy that affects their wealth, especially when they've worked so hard to get that home. So the consequences could be that it obviously affect all properties, not just necessarily investors.
Very well said. So for all the listeners who joined us late in the community, episode 51, negative gearing, you can go and check out the views. Ben and I labour on it for some time. We've given a whole range of bullet points for you to consider. Obviously, Ben's touched on it there as well. So, mate, I guess the meeting this week, it was, how would you rate it? Was it a success? Was it just to bring, what was the KPI? Just bringing all the minds together?
Yeah, it was, and validating positions, and it was very clear that there were some really strong views about how dangerous it is, and there was also some neutral views. But one thing that was unanimous was that we all believe that changes to negative gearing without getting hard data to back up the true scenario of what will happen is ill-conceived. And so we don't, everyone was unanimous that there shouldn't be any changes in negative gearing. Now, we're not saying also that we shouldn't have a tax debate and a broader, we're open to that conversation. We understand that everyone needs to play a part. We don't have the roads and the parks and the amenity and the health and education without putting our hand in our pocket. We get that.
Everyone in the room's a big picture thinker. They want tax reform, they want the economy to grow, but just not knee-jerk reactions.
Correct. So let's, don't just hit one sort of slab thinking you're going to have a revenue grab. It's not good policy.
Very good. There you have it, folks. A couple of things we covered off today. Obviously, the rent vesting. We'd be interested in your thoughts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We'll also have on the website today, Ivis will give you a copy of the article so that you can go and read it for yourself. Again, give Ben some feedback. He's always wanting to grow and improve. If you've got some thoughts, let him know. But mate, that's 30 minutes of good quality content there. So here's the 60 seconds.
We think it might be. The listener might go.
Small bit at the beginning regarding the rugby. Again.
Yeah, apologies for all of our rugby viewers. I'm seriously a big fan of the Rabbitohs. Watch it.
Yeah.
I was the Reds because I lived in Queensland before I lived in New South Wales. So I follow in the state of origin, I go for the Maroons, not necessarily the...
Folks, you can't see, but Ben's got a really big shovel here. He's digging, he's trying to dig himself out of this.
It was a joke that I used to run when I was living up in Sydney, because obviously a Melbourne boy living in a big city like Sydney, everyone has a little bit of a banter against each other.
Yeah,
so like our Western Australians versus the Victorians.
So who's the Rabbitohs playing this week?
They've got a big tough game ahead of themselves.
Who was it against again?
Caught me out. I'm absolutely... I have no idea.
Very good.
Where are we on the ladder? Yeah, middle of the road.
Yeah.
That's about it. I sort of glance at it. You called me out. I was having a nice little chuckle.
Yeah, probably same spot as Collingwood. All right, so where are we going around the world?
Mate,
haven't gone to the New Zealand game. Is there any New Zealand sign-offs?
I literally have just picked up this piece of paper and I'm looking at it, and I don't even know what this is, right? But it says Tok Pisin, which is so TOKPISIN. Now I don't know what language that is, but I do like the sign off.
All right, here we go, folks. You've been waiting for it.
And it's goodbye. GUTBAI. I'm like, whoa, I'm all over that.
You should have done that from the beginning.
I have no idea what that language is, but I'm absolutely loving it. There's a little bit more complex one underneath it, but I'm not going to touch that. So yeah, I'm just going to. Now, do you want to try and pronounce the language?
Tok Pisin, I'll go with.
Your Pisin?
I'll go with the Pisin, but there you go, folks. As Ben says in Tok Pisin, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. See you next week.